You do not want to know how many times I tried to record today, but let's try this again. Today I'm going to cover CSS and HTML in this recording. HTML means hypertext markup language, CSS means cascading style sheets. When you start an HTML document, the first thing you want to specify is doc type. This tag doesn't have an N, but it does exactly what it says on the name. In this case, all we need is doc type HTML, but Blue Griffin filled in the rest. Fun fact, there was once a program called Envu/Composer. In fact, it's still there if you check portableapps.com. So what's the problem? Well, for one, it's outdated. Yeah, there's a storm outside. Just bear with me. And for another, it became outdated when its developers got into a squabble. One person decided to take up mantle and found all these bugs and named the bugs after the previous developer. So that previous developer took offense, said, okay, it's all yours, and decided to move on to make Blue Griffin, which has a few more things you can do if you pay up, but doesn't take away from base functionality. Basically, Blue Griffin is everything Composer wishes it was in the almost 10 plus years it's been outdated. I previously tried to use Composer, but then I gave Blue Griffin a look and decided, you know what, despite all these screenshots and despite what the functions tell me I need to pay up to use, I'll give it a try. So far, I haven't been punished or disappointed. So the creator of Blue Griffin, thank you for creating this software. A few other tags of interest are what the tag already contained inside. So for instance, and I'm going to copy this, excuse me. So for instance, we have the HTML tag. Everything goes inside this tag except CSS, which I'll explain later. The head and body tags get to be separate. You can put a title in here, but it doesn't matter. It only edits the title you see up here. It still reads untitled, but I named it external CSS target for a reason you'll find out very shortly. The body tags contain everything else. Unlike the doc type HTML tag, unlike the doc type tag, which does not need an end tag, and unlike the break line tag, which does what it says on the label, it breaks the line, most tags you'll meet in HTML do require an end tag. That end tag is basically the same name as the first tag, except it has a forward slash in it. For instance, you'll see that the HTML tag also has a twin with a forward slash in front so you can tell them apart. Now there are three types of CSS you want to worry about, but I'll talk about that in just a minute. Look at the body tag for a moment. Look at the fact that there are tags that read P. In this case, P means paragraph. I'm doing this for a very specific reason. You could imitate a paragraph by using two break line tags, but let me explain that when I get there. Line 1, still there. Still line 1. But why? Because HTML tends to ignore specific things, like excessive breakpoints and excessive spaces. In order to add a break space in HTML, you need to use the break line tag, which is BR. It's break for short. Now, if that doesn't tickle your fancy, you could instead just use the editor. So when it comes to Blue Griffin, you could do things through the editor itself or through the HTML editor, through the web page itself or through the editor. Due to the preference, I'm just going to use the HTML editor. As you can see, it ignores break lines unless I use a break line tag. So there's the broken line. There's also a horizontal line tag, which is HR, which doesn't need an end tag. and it does exactly what it says on the label. It stretches the horizontal line across the entire document and nothing else. This paragraph is an entirely separate paragraph. It just does the same thing. I could use two breakline tags to get the same thing. But there's a reason we want to use separate paragraphs in some cases, as I'll get to shortly. I will have you know before I talk about CSS that HTML only puts content on the page, while CSS tells it where to go and how to look. And if you need proof, look no further than this. This is a layout I use for broadcasting and recording. Most of these sources in here are separate web pages. You can see images in some of these web pages. I almost said web sources. But there's a reason behind this. It's because it makes life easier. There are some things OBS can't do alone. The scroll effect, it can do, but the rest, not really. Even the chat room from CapChat is being edited through CSS, and that's internal CSS, but I guarantee you that's the last time I will, because I just found out how external CSS works. In all my years playing around with HTML, CSS, even way back in high school, I never quite got into CSS until too late. That's because the main thing I was learning in high school was HTML. Outside of that, I did take the time to try to learn CSS, and boy oh boy, the wonders it did. So here I am. All the things you see, the designs, the backgrounds are their own separate web pages. The text in front of them, that's scrolling thanks to OBS. Those are also their own web pages. Even the backgrounds between each paragraphs and the borders around them, the text, and even the image separating some of the text in there, those are all CSS. But I'll get to that later. Excuse me. Not everything needs to be inside of HTML, and this is for a pretty good reason. First, let's open up a new document so you can see this for yourself. In case you're wondering why I look like I'm typing in the dark, it's because I'm using a keyboard that's designed to be quiet, and it has different material. The problem is some of the keys are worn out, and apparently as long as I've been using keyboards, I don't remember where all the keys are. One of the main things Blue Griffin does for you automatically is close tags when you type in an open tag. I only typed in the first tag, but it gave me the end tag right away. I'm doing this in a very disorganized fashion, but please bear with me. One of the main things Blue Griffin does is fill in tags for you when you type an open tag. I typed in the P tag and got an end tag automatically. As I just explained, assuming I wasn't talking to a brick wall the whole time, everything you see out here is surrounded by web pages. The scroll effect is the only thing OBS is doing, and then some of the images I threw in there directly. So the backgrounds and the text in front of those backgrounds are each their own separate web pages. They're each their own browser sources. I really need to pay attention to when I mute and unmute. There are multiple ways to make things look colorful with just HTML alone, but most of these have been deprecated since I last checked. For instance, the day beforehand when I was trying to record this, and I tried to type in body background, it wouldn't work. No matter how hard I tried, I looked around, it just wouldn't work. Turns out it's deprecated, I needed to use a style for this. So let's go with the first type of CSS you're going to find. That would be inline CSS. I'm going to take this body tag and put some CSS in the line. Let's change the background. I want this background to be a nice brisk blue. While you're burning your eyes at the sight of blue background behind black text, let me explain what's going on here. In order to make CSS work, you need to tell it some certain commands. But you might notice I put a semicolon behind it, despite the fact that there's going to be nothing else in front of it. That is something you need to get used to doing, so that when you type in things through internal or external CSS, that when things don't work and you're wondering why, 9 out of 10 times it causes you didn't separate them with a semicolon. And there's an entire vast reference of things you can do with CSS, which will be its own separate video. This is just a startup. Having done that, I'm just going to undo it and go for internal CSS. In order to make internal CSS work, you need to type it outside the HTML tags. Sometimes you won't see a doc type in some HTML documents, but that's okay. As long as you're outside the first HTML tag, as long as you're outside the beginning HTML tag, and you try to put in internal CSS, everything will work just fine. But things are going to look a little different here. First, I need to say body, so it's referring to the body tag, the body section here. And then I'm going to throw in some brackets, different kinds of brackets. Now within those brackets, I'm going to tell it the same thing I told through the inline CSS. Right, that's the first mistake I made. Outside those HTML tags, you're going to want to put in a specific type of HTML tag. That tag is style. Okay, glad I made that mistake so you know for next time. You can't just type out CSS outside the HTML tags and expect to get away with it. You need to specify that as within a style. But now for the third type of CSS, and I'm doing my very best to explain this before I go into HTML any further to make your life easier. That would be external CSS. Anytime you see a %20 between words, that would represent a blank space. You cannot have blank spaces when you specify file names in particular. And unlike what we see in the web, unlike what we see in W3 schools, which I had to reference a few times by now, apparently Blue Griffin works differently. Or that, well, all HTML works differently from what Blue Griffin is showing me and what W3 schools is showing me. Now, not to worry, I already have this document open. It's completely blank. But we can fill it with the same content we did before. And that's exactly what we're going to do. For this purpose, we do not need to specify tags of any kind. We do not need to use style tags. I can make the same mistake I made before, only it won't be a mistake because it's an external style sheet. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Then I'm going to save this document. That's what it noticed. A change was made. And there you have it. Less harsh text on a background. You didn't see the prompt. You might not have seen the prompt, but it told me a change was made and that I needed to reload the page. If there was a way for me to manually load the page this way, I'd have done it by now. Excuse me while I check through colors for a moment. Too dark. Still too dark. Better. Easier on the eyes. I just had to change the color a few times. Now let's step away from CSS and go back to HTML. There are a few things I'd also like to explain before I stop recording and start uploading. For once, you don't need to just add text in here, you can also add media. For this case, we're going to add an image. But I do need to point out one thing before I continue. Images need to be local to the machine or available on a server that only the document can access. What I mean by that is you have an HTML document and next to that document is a bunch of media. Or next to that document is a bunch of folders that have the media. Or within those folders are folders that have media. Or within those folders are folders that have folders that have folders that have folders that have folders. You get the idea. Somewhere local to the machine, that somewhere local to the machine and the file on it needs to be where the media is. But this is for a good reason. It's the same reason that that I'm having a hard time saying this, that HTML files and media tend to be on the same machine or server or have the ability to only access each other. The only exception to this being if it's available on the web through a link, like some place called Imgur. This is because if I were to go to an online web page and try to add an image to it, but the image is only local on my machine, not available online, it's not going to add itself. Because if it were to be able to, that means everybody on Earth will be able to access my image. And that also means there's a problem because it means they could also access my machine. So there's going to be a lot of people trying to hack into my machine and steal my stuff. We don't want that, and so it's disallowed. It's really hard to explain. Maybe they do a better job. Let's see, let's ask. Hey, W3 Schools, can you tell us about this? It doesn't. I'm not going to bother. Instead, I'm just going to tell you how to add an image. How to add an image because I just know how. The tag you're looking for is image. IMG. Now, the image I'm looking for is indeed inside another folder, so of course I'm going to have a little trouble looking for it. I won't be able to immediately name it. That means I need to name the folder it is in, and then the image itself. For this purpose, you're going to have to see what image I'm referring to. Here I am. It's not going to be any of these images. This is the folder I'm looking for. Now, this is the CSS sheet, but this is just the backup file, don't worry about that. This is also the main file. If the image were right next to it, for instance, profile picture badge or badge 2, then I would just name those instead. For instance, you know what? Let me do that right now so you can see what I'm talking about. And apparently I don't know what I'm doing because I'm looking up the answer right now. As you might have noticed, the image tag also doesn't have a closing tag for that purpose. But now I'm going to have to refer to something inside of a folder. And for this purpose, I'm going to make a mistake on purpose. Inside additional images is an image I want to use instead. So what happens if I were to just type this as is alone? Well, you might have guessed because I already explained it. But I'm going to do it anyway. This is exactly what you get. A broken image. But why does that happen and how can you fix it? Well, first, there are a number of ways. We're going to apply an alt here. We're going to give it a name. So that name appears instead of the broken image itself. It's not displaying, I'm just not going to bother. But instead, we need to tell where the folder is. And that's as simple as naming the folder itself. So back in File Explorer, I'm just going to have to bear with me. I'm just going to have to figure this out later. Because W3 Schools is telling me one thing, but things aren't working out. I'm reading it right now. So the name of the folder is additional images, which means that's what I'm going to type in. But I'm not going to type it in as is. I need to type in a dot and a forward slash first. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Dot forward slash. The caps aren't necessary, they just help. As you can see, this image is way too big, but we can resize that right now using some internal CSS. Either inline or external. So here we go with the inline CSS. I'm going to give it a width that isn't that large. Style tag. And there you go. That's the inline CSS. But again, we know how internal CSS works too, so why not? Now you might notice a problem here. I'm going to put the same image in here twice just to let you see what's going on. So what happens if I remove this? Now you got two images that are twice the size. What if I want this to apply to only one image? That is where the classes and ID tags come in. For this purpose, I'm going to give the first image an ID of broken mega symbol 1. I'm putting underscores in here because it doesn't like when I use plain old spaces. So now, in order to reference an ID, you need to use a pound symbol. In order to reference a class, you need to use in order to reference a class, you use a pound symbol. No. Am I mistaken about that? I'm getting confused. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm just going to find out right now. Okay, so I was right. For ID, it's the pound symbol. How do I know? Because W3 Schools said so. So let's do that right now. That means all other images will be this exact width. But the one that has the ID of broken mega symbol 1, i.e. the only one with that ID, is going to have a different size anyway. I could specify the length, but that would just make it skew. And when I found out I could just specify the width and it would keep the aspect ratio, I wasn't going to complain one bit. Classes will be a different story. Classes will be a different video. Right now, there's one more thing I want to talk about. Fonts. Oh, that's right. That's right. Let's remove this. We don't want internal CSS, do we? We don't. We want external CSS. So guess what we're going to do? Then we're going to remove this. Save the document. And wait for it to tell me to refresh. Much better. The text looks a little bland. We can in fact fix that, and I will display this using internal CSS, not external, because why should I if I don't have to? But that means I also get to talk about classes. P counts as a class. But I could also give it its own class name. And so I'm about to. Now why am I doing this? Because in order for HTML, in order for internal CSS to work, I need to cooperate. So now so let me show you what's going on here. Why am I using a dot in front of the P? It's because it's referring to the HTML tag itself. I didn't have to do this for image, but I'm doing it for P just in case. Okay, I don't need the dot. But as you might have noticed, I only want this to apply to the first paragraph, i.e. the first lines that read line 1, line 1. Line 1 still line 1, broken line. So how do I do that? Well, that's simple. I use another set of brackets, and this time it's going to refer to P1. So, as you know, use hashtags or pound symbols to refer to IDs. Use dots to refer to classes. And use neither of those to refer to HTML tags. But as you might have guessed, I'm going to throw this all into the external CSS document. I need to pay attention to that. I really do. Now there is one more thing I need to talk about. Hyperlinks. We're going to put in a hyperlink as text and as an image. How do hyperlinks work? How do they work? The tag you want is ahref. And for this purpose, we need to specify a CPS. Without that first section, it's going to try to look for a page that's local on your machine instead of on the web. But remember, we need text in here. We can't just have a plain old link lying around. It won't work. So how do we do that? We add some text. The whole There is an end tag for this. The whole reason Blue Griffin didn't add one was because I never specified in the first place. See, there is an end tag. It does exist. We have this lying around out here, but we still need to add some text. If I were to click that link right now, it would take me straight to the site. You can tell because it has an underline in it. But we can also do the same thing with images. So guess what image we're going to use? Because at this point, why not? Or better yet, let me just use another one. Let me just use the first one I used. I'm sure you remember this image. I just used it. I just used it not too long ago. I'm not going to have that. I'm going to give it an ID. Okay, so it still exists, which means back in the external CSS aisle, better. So how does this work? Well, first of all, now this points to the same place. And then I'm so used to typing that out all the way without someone doing it for me, without someone or something doing it for me. So now this picture is a link. which means when I click the link, it'll take me to the site itself. I was originally planning on explaining HTML by itself before CSS, but from where I stand, even through what is clearly unrehearsed, it is much easier on everyone's lives if I explain HTML and CSS at the same time. Because while I explain how tags work, HTML tags work, I can also explain how to use CSS to shape the content of those tags. That is to say, what could have been a bunch of videos, but will surely be a few short other videos to help better explain this later on, has become one really long, almost 45-minute video explaining a bunch of tags very briefly and poorly in some cases, mind you, but also how to use CSS to shape how those tags look, how the content inside those tags look. I could even add videos in here, but I guarantee those videos will not play in this editor. However, there is proof that videos do work, specifically in format OGG. What's that proof? Right there. See those backgrounds? Those are video backgrounds. Those are not GIFs. Those are not image sequences. That is too junky for my taste. Both of those are a little too... The latter is a little too junky for my tastes. And so far, OGG is the only thing that worked. Those are, in fact, image sequences. But don't get me wrong. You know, I need to make a correction. I do, in fact, need to make a correction. I earlier said that the backgrounds behind the text, behind the scoring text, were web pages. I, in fact, unwittingly lied. I did, in fact, once try to add those as browser images, but the problem is, even though I could get them aligned to give the illusion that they are all the same image, the same background, I could not get it all to play at the same time, no matter how many times I refreshed. And so the solution was to use multiple sources, multiple of the same source on repeat, and just line them up correctly. That means they are layered on top of one another in order to give the illusion that they are the same, that they are all the same stretch of image. So I apologize for that. It is possible to do this, but it's not possible to get it all and it is possible to get it all to align correctly, but it's not all possible to get it all to play correctly at the same time. The illusion would break at that point, and it would therefore be a complete waste of time. So hear me when I say this. Do not, under any circumstances, try to add backgrounds through web pages. Just do it through OBS. But with that, I do have to stop right here. I have things I need to upload, including this not-so-rehearsed video. And while I will go out of my way to make smaller videos explaining specific things in a little bit of better detail, including with the help of W3 Schools if it comes down to it, which it just might very clearly, I hope this video helps enlighten you a little bit, and there will be more like it. Worst case, if I make a better version of this video, I will upload and replace this one. Until then, please excuse me.